The rain that evening wasn't just falling, it was soaking through everything. It plastered shirts to backs, turned sidewalks into mirrors, and blurred the hard outlines of the world into something soft and shivering. A lone gas station sat under a flickering neon sign at the corner of Pine and Howell Street, its light barely cutting through the thick mist curling around its pumps. Inside the narrow convenience store, the scent of burnt coffee, motor oil, and wet concrete made a strange kind of comfort, the kind familiar to night shift workers and drifters alike. Tom Rourke stood by the register, fingers curled around a hot cup of coffee he hadn't paid for yet. 53 years old, shoulders heavy from years of lifting crates and building scaffolds, he looked like the kind of man who'd been tired for decades. His flannel shirt had holes in the elbows. His boots, steel-toed and worn thin at the soles, squelched faintly when he shifted. A plastic bag with 2 cans of tuna and a roll of bread lay on the counter. The total came to $9.73. He only had a 10. He wasn't here to feel sorry for himself. It was just another day in the stretch of days that felt like borrowed time, ever since the layoffs at the steel plant, ever since his wife had passed and left the trailer house far too quiet. The tuna was dinner and breakfast. The bread might last until Thursday. Maybe. He reached for his wallet. Then he heard it. Soft at first, but unmistakable. A cry. No, not just a cry. The kind of sound that came from someone trying not to cry, and failing. The sound of heartbreak muffled into sleeves. He turned. Outside, just near pump 3, sat a boy. Maybe 16, maybe 17, soaked through, curled up on the curb with his arms around his knees and his backpack slouched beside him like a forgotten thought. He was wearing a thin hoodie, one sneaker missing, the other torn, and his face pale, raw with salt and tears, too young to look that hopeless. Tom stepped outside. The rain hit him like a curtain, cold and immediate. He approached slowly, not wanting to scare the kid. "Hey," he said, voice deep but gentle. "You all right?" The boy startled, wiping his eyes quickly, like shame had a faster reflex than pain. "Fine," he muttered. "You sure don't look it." The boy sniffled, staring at the pavement. "I missed the bus. My phone's dead. I just needed to get home. It's..." Tom crouched down beside him, ignoring the sting in his knees. "Where's home?" The boy hesitated. "Eastbrook." Tom blinked. Eastbrook was at least 40 miles away. I thought I had enough money for gas. I walked part of the way, tried calling my brother, but he broke off with a frustrated sound. "Doesn't matter." Tom looked him over. This wasn't a scam. This wasn't a con. This was just a scared kid with nowhere to go, soaked to the bone, trying to keep dignity from slipping through his fingers. He didn't think long. Tom stood, walked back inside, and laid his $10 bill on the counter. "Put 10 on pump 3. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "What about your stuff?" Tom gave a lopsided shrug. "Guess I'm fasting tonight." The clerk didn't smile, just nodded. Back outside, Tom held out the pump handle. "Go fill up." The boy blinked, stunned. "You didn't have to." "I know. But why?" Tom gave a quiet laugh. "I got a daughter somewhere about your age. Haven't seen her in a while. Figured I'd help you. Like I hope someone might help her if she ever needed it." The boy stared at him for a long second, then stood. "My name's Jesse," he said softly. "Tom." "Thank you, Tom." Tom nodded, patted him once on the shoulder, and turned back toward the road, the hunger in his stomach now strangely distant. The rain was still falling, but it didn't feel as heavy. He didn't look back. He never saw Jesse drive off. He didn't expect to. 3 years later, Tom was back on his feet. Not by much, but enough. He worked part-time at a community hardware store. He'd moved into a small apartment above the shop, kept a small garden on the fire escape. Life had shrunk, but in a way that felt manageable, even kind. He didn't have much, but he had enough. He still thought about that night sometimes, about Jesse, the wet hoodie, the cracked voice. He'd wondered once or twice if the kid made it home. But Tom didn't dwell. He wasn't the type to expect things in return. He gave because someone had once given to him when he'd hit rock bottom, an old vet named Morris, a man who'd handed him a sandwich and a second chance. That was just the way kindness worked. It passed through people. Until the morning, everything changed. It was a crisp October morning when a dark sedan pulled up in front of the hardware store. A tall woman in a charcoal blazer stepped out, holding a thin leather portfolio. Her heels clicked across the sidewalk as she approached Tom, who was watering the mums out front. "Mr. Tom Rourke?" she asked. Tom straightened, wary. "That's me." She extended a hand. "My name is Eleanor Parks. I'm an estate attorney. I was hoping you had a few minutes to talk." He frowned. "Estate? I don't know anyone who's died lately." She smiled faintly. "Actually, it's not about death. It's about a will." Tom's heart ticked faster. Eleanor opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of thick paper, embossed and official. Across the top it read, "Last Will and Testament of Jesse E. Marin." Tom's breath caught. "That name mean anything to you?" she asked. He stared at it like it had come from another lifetime. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Yeah, it does." And without waiting for her to say more, Tom felt it. A shift in the air, like a door creaking open from somewhere far behind him. A story he hadn't realized was still being written. Tom stood frozen beside the chrysanthemums, the hose still running in his hand, water pooling near his feet and trickling toward the gutter like time slipping away. His throat had gone dry. He blinked at the words on the paper again, not because he couldn't read them, but because they felt too unreal, too surreal, like they'd been written in some other version of reality where things like this actually happened. "Jesse," he repeated softly, "he was just a kid." Eleanor gave him a nod that held both gravity and gentleness. "He was 22 when he passed. A car accident, out near I-7. Drunk driver ran a red light." Tom's heart dropped like a stone thrown into deep water. "God," he whispered. The word barely more than breath. He let the hose fall slack and rubbed a hand across his weathered face. "I remember him sitting on that curb, looked like the whole world had given up on him." "He remembered you," Eleanor said quietly, "more than you could ever imagine." Tom looked at her, his brows furrowing, not understanding. She gestured toward the bench outside the shop. "Do you have time to sit?" He nodded slowly, as if he were moving through molasses, and followed her to the bench. They sat beneath the dappled shade of the awning, the wind rustling faintly through the paper-thin pages of the will she held. "He wrote this barely a month before the accident," she began. "Apparently, he was preparing to launch a non-profit, something to help kids in crisis, those aging out of foster care, homeless teens. It was going to be called the Rourke Foundation." Tom's head jerked toward her, stunned. "What?" She smiled, gently this time. "Named after you." He stared at her, speechless. "He told me in his words that the night you gave him that $10 was the moment his life turned. He'd hit bottom. He'd just run away from a bad home situation, hadn't eaten in a day, was thinking about giving up, said the way you looked at him like he was still worth saving, flipped something inside him." Tom could feel a tremble starting in his hands, the emotion rising so swiftly, and suddenly, he didn't know where to put it. He clenched his fists in his lap to steady himself. He said he didn't want to waste that chance, that moment. So he got clean, worked nights while finishing high school, earned a scholarship to Millridge University, graduated with honors in social work. Tom shook his head slowly, as if trying to clear fog from a window. "I never knew." "He wanted to find you," Eleanor added, her voice more tender now. "Said he searched, online, asked around, even went back to that gas station once, but no one knew your name. He only remembered Tom. No last name. He thought he'd never find you, but he never stopped telling people about you. Every time he was invited to speak or share his story, it always began with the man at the gas station." Tom felt something like a weight in his chest, but not the crushing kind, the full kind, like the heart expanding too quickly to hold it all in. "What was in the will?" he asked hoarsely. "Why come find me?" Eleanor reached back into her folder and took out another sheet, this one less formal, handwritten in neat, rounded letters. She unfolded it and held it between them. "It's a personal letter. He asked that I read it to you." Tom swallowed hard, his palms pressed against his knees. Eleanor cleared her throat softly and began.
"Dear Tom,
"I don't know if you remember me. I was the kid crying on the curb outside the Pine Street gas station. You gave me $10 and didn't ask for anything in return. You didn't judge me. You didn't turn away. That night you saved my life. I never got the chance to say thank you properly. But everything good I've done since then, every child I've helped, every life I've touched, was because of the seed you planted in me that night. I wanted you to know that your kindness became my compass. If you're hearing this, then I didn't make it as far as I wanted, but I want my work to go on. That's why I've named you the executor of my foundation. I've left instructions and funding for the Rourke Foundation, a space where lost kids can find hope, just like I did. I know it's a lot to ask, but I trust you. After all, you saw something in me when no one else did. With all my gratitude, Jessie E. Mary. By the time she finished, Tom's eyes were wet. He wasn't sobbing. The tears came slow and quiet, the kind that seep up from old wounds and long roads, from pride and grief interwoven. I don't understand, he said finally, his voice cracking. I'm just a hardware store clerk. I'm nobody special. Eleanor turned to him with gentle resolve. That's not what Jessie thought. And honestly, Mr. Rourke, the world needs more nobodies like you. Tom laughed shakily, wiping at his face with the back of his hand. A foundation? Named after me? It sounds like a story you'd read in a church bulletin or see on TV, not real life. It's very real, she said. He left $500,000 in seed funding from a tech grant he won, and there are more donations promised, all under your name. He looked down at the concrete beneath his feet, rough and worn, like the roads he'd walked all his life. Then he looked up into the clean October sky, and something in his face shifted, like a man realizing that all the time he thought he'd lost was quietly waiting for him to catch up. All right, he said softly, if this is what Jessie wanted, I'll see it through. Eleanor smiled, closing the folder with care. He'd be proud. Tom stood, slower now, but taller somehow, straighter. There was a tremor in his chest, but it wasn't fear, it was purpose. He looked at the mums, yellow and orange and full of life, and thought of Jessie as he'd last seen him, soaked, shivering, fragile, and now, living on. Not in a grave, not in silence, but in every kid who would walk through the doors of a place named for a man who once gave his last $10 to someone he didn't know, and never asked for anything back. The days that followed blurred together like a painting in the rain, familiar colors made new by context, by purpose. Tom Rourke, once just a tired man at a gas station, now found himself holding the blueprint of someone else's dream, a dream seeded by his own forgotten kindness. And though part of him still felt out of place, like a steelworker dropped into a room of suits and signatures, another part had begun to stir, something deeper, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Eleanor helped him set up the first steps. There were legal forms, bank accounts, nonprofit applications. Tom signed papers with hands that had once only known hammers and wrenches. He learned terms like board of directors and fiscal sponsor. Every time he doubted himself, Eleanor would point gently to Jessie's letter, framed now on the small wall above his kitchen table. One night, he stood staring at it for a long time. The ink had smudged slightly from his tears that first day, and now the curve of Jessie's writing seemed even more human, imperfect, but full of intent. I want my work to go on, the letter read. And now it would. By the end of winter, the Rourke Foundation had an office. Nothing grand, just 2 rooms above a laundromat on 12th and Hemlock, with aging carpet and windows that let in more cold than light. But to Tom, it was more than enough. He bought second-hand chairs and a chipped oak desk from a church basement sale. A local high school art teacher donated 3 paintings, sunrises and wide-open skies, for the walls. And then, slowly, the stories started to come. The first was a girl named Maribel, 17, quiet, eyes that held too many years for her age. She didn't say much at first, just sat in the waiting room with a backpack clenched in her lap, staring at the floor. Tom brought her tea, sat across from her in the cracked leather chair, didn't press. It took her 2 visits before she spoke more than a sentence, 3 before she smiled, 6 before she finally whispered, "Thank you." Each week, there was someone new, a runaway, a teen kicked out for coming out, a boy who couldn't read but hid it behind anger, a girl pregnant at 16 with no one left to call. They came not because the building was big or fancy, but because word had spread that someone was there, someone who listened, someone who didn't look at them like a case file, but like Jessie had once looked at Tom, with quiet faith. Tom wasn't a counselor. He didn't pretend to be, but he sat beside them, brought in local volunteers, called in favors from folks he knew, a retired school nurse, a former pastor, a barber who gave free haircuts. He organized weekend meals with donations from nearby diners. Sometimes, he just handed out clean socks and watched someone's whole posture change. Still, he thought of Jesse every day. One afternoon, while sorting through foundation mail, he found a small box with no return address. Inside was a photo, old, faded at the corners but unmistakable. It was the gas station. Pump 3. And on the back, in tight pen strokes, was written, "This is where everything changed." Tom stared at it for a long while, the ache in his chest blooming again, but it was a sweet ache, the kind that reminds you what love and legacy really mean. The picture now sat in a frame beside Jesse's letter. By the one-year anniversary of Jesse's death, the Rourke Foundation had helped 47 teens find temporary housing. 11 had re-enrolled in school. 3 had been reunited with family. 1 had landed a full scholarship to college. But Tom never bragged. He only smiled, quietly. Every time someone asked how he started it all, he gave the same answer. "I didn't. A kid named Jesse did. I just gave him $10. One rainy Friday, almost a full year after Eleanor first walked up to him by the mums, she returned. She stood at the door of the foundation office, holding a small envelope and her familiar leather folder. "You have a visitor," she said gently, stepping aside. A boy, lanky, nervous, with hair too long and shoes too big, stepped in behind her. "This is Ryan," Eleanor explained. He was the last case Jesse was working on, before the accident." Tom's eyes softened immediately. "He talked about you all the time," Ryan said. "Said you were the reason he made it, that you believed in people before they believed in themselves. He told me, if anything ever happened to him, I should come find you." Tom motioned for him to sit, his voice thick with emotion. "Well, Ryan, I'm glad you did." Eleanor stayed a moment longer, then passed Tom the envelope and nodded goodbye. When he opened it later that night, sitting in the quiet glow of his office lamp, he found another letter. Not from Jesse this time, from Jesse's younger brother.
Dear Mr. Rourke,
"I don't know you, but I feel like I do. Jesse talked about you like you were a lighthouse, something that never moved but changed the direction of everything around it. He left behind more than money. He left behind a mission. I've decided to help continue his work. I'm studying social work now because of him, because of you. I just wanted you to know the ripple is still moving."
thank you for saving my brother.
"Thank you for saving us all." Caleb Mering. Tom sat very still for a long time, staring at the letter. Outside, the city carried on, sirens in the distance, rain on the windows. But in that small office above the laundromat, something deeper was happening. A life was being lived in reverse, the kind of life that becomes more full the more you give it away. And Tom Rourke, once just a tired man with $10 and a kind heart, now understood. Sometimes, the smallest act becomes the biggest legacy. The morning of the foundation's second anniversary dawned cold and wind-chapped, but the office above the laundromat was already alive with quiet energy. Volunteers unpacked trays of donated muffins and poured coffee into mismatched mugs. Tom, now comfortably dressed in his usual flannel and work jeans, moved from room to room with a clipboard in hand, a tool he'd grown into like a well-worn glove. The Rourke Foundation was holding its first ever open house. Local businesses had pitched in, a neighborhood choir was scheduled to sing, and a few of the teens who'd once come in broken were now returning to share their stories. Outside, the stoop still bore the cracks of 2 winters past, but inside, the walls were filled with color and life, murals painted by former clients, photographs of young faces caught mid-laughter, and sticky notes of encouragement from one kid to another. The desk in Tom's corner still held Jesse's letter, and the old gas station photo, now laminated to preserve it from fingerprints and time. Tom stood in the middle of the main room, arms crossed, heart full. He hadn't just built something, he'd become part of something living, something Jesse had only imagined, but which now breathed through every life it touched. As guests trickled in, Tom welcomed each one personally. He wasn't much for speeches, but he shook every hand, asked every name, and remembered most of them. Near the entrance, a banner read, in soft blue lettering, "Hope doesn't have to shout. Sometimes it just shows up." The words had been Jesse's. Tom had found them scribbled in the margins of a grant application months after the foundation launched. Now they were part of its ethos, stitched into every welcome packet, printed on the back of volunteer shirts, etched in quiet strength into the soul of the place. Just after noon, Eleanor appeared again. This time not in her lawyerly role, but as a friend. She wore a pale green scarf and brought a small potted plant, a flowering dogwood with a tag that read, "In memory of beginnings." I thought maybe the front steps needed a little more life, she said with a warm smile. Tom took the pot gently and nodded. It's perfect. Just like him, soft-spoken but impossible to ignore. Eleanor's eyes glistened, but she didn't let the tears fall. He'd be so proud of you, Tom. I still don't feel like I'm doing enough, Tom admitted, his voice low. There's always another kid, another need. It feels endless sometimes. Eleanor placed a hand on his arm. That's because love is endless, and what you're doing, it's not about finishing. It's about showing up again and again. Before he could reply, a voice called from the side of the room. Mr. Rourke? Tom turned. A young woman stood there, maybe 20, with strong eyes and nervous hands. She clutched a journal against her chest, its corners dog-eared from use. You probably don't remember me, she said. I came in 6 months ago. I was pregnant, scared, alone. You didn't ask questions. You just handed me a sandwich and sat with me while I cried. Tom's brow furrowed, trying to place her, but she smiled kindly and continued. You said something that day. Something like, sometimes you don't need to fix it. Just be there so someone doesn't break alone. He nodded slowly. He remembered now. I wanted to show you something, she said. And from behind her, a stroller appeared, pushed by a woman from the choir. Inside, a small baby slept peacefully, bundled in a knitted blue cap. His name is Jesse. Tom's knees almost buckled. The room spun for a second, but not from dizziness, from depth, from the weight of full-circle moments that wrap around the heart like warm hands. I didn't know what to do back then, the young mother said, eyes shining. But now I do, because of you. I'm starting nursing school next month. Tom stepped forward and, with her permission, touched the baby's small fingers. They curled around his rough pinky, strong despite their size. He cleared his throat. You're the brave one, not me. No, she said, voice firm. You were the first person who saw me as more than a mistake. That gave me everything. The rest of the open house moved like a dream song and laughter, quiet tears and embraces. But Tom kept returning in his mind to that stroller, that tiny hand, that name, that night. As the office emptied and the last folding chair clattered back into storage, Tom lingered at the photo wall. It had grown over time, layer upon layer of faces and handwritten notes and snapshots of progress. He stepped back to admire it, only to notice something new tucked in the bottom corner. A small, typed note. No signature. You don't have to save the world. Just one person. Because you never know. That one person might. Tom stared at it, breath caught in his throat. Maybe Jesse hadn't written it. Maybe someone else had. It didn't matter. The truth of it echoed through every brick of the building. Outside, night had begun to fall. The city buzzed with its usual noise. Traffic lights blinking, tires splashing through puddles. But in that little office above the laundromat, the light stayed on. And Tom Rourke sat down at his desk, picked up his pen, and began writing a note of his own. Not for himself, but for the next kid who would walk in from the rain. Because the work wasn't finished. Because Jesse's voice still lingered in the silence. And because some stories don't end, they ripple outward, carried on the shoulders of ordinary people who choose, day after day, to love loudly in a quiet world. The sun rose slowly over the city skyline, casting long amber streaks through the foundation's frosted windows. Tom sat at his desk, the gentle hum of morning filling the room with a comforting rhythm. His pen hovered over a fresh sheet of paper, but his thoughts drifted back to all the lives intertwined with this place, stories like threads weaving a tapestry of hope, struggle, and relentless kindness. The foundation had become a beacon, not just for the kids who came in desperate and afraid, but for a community that had learned to care again. It was no longer just Tom's journey, it was Jesse's legacy carried by many hands, many hearts. As the clock ticked forward, the doorbell chimed softly, and Tom looked up to see a man in a crisp suit standing hesitantly in the doorway. The man's presence was different, polished, purposeful, the kind that belonged in boardrooms and courtrooms, not the worn carpet and chipped paint of this humble office. "Mr. Rourke?" the man asked, voice steady but warm. "That's me," Tom replied, standing and wiping his hands on a threadbare towel. "My name's Daniel Hayes. I'm an attorney with Marin & Partners," he said, pulling an envelope from his briefcase. "I'm here on behalf of Caleb Marin, Jesse's brother." Tom's heart skipped, even after all this time. Daniel continued, Caleb asked me to deliver this to you personally. It's the final piece of Jesse's plan. Tom took the envelope with trembling hands and carefully opened it. Inside was a thick packet of documents, neatly bound and marked with Jesse's signature on each page. It was a detailed will, meticulously written, not only distributing Jesse's modest savings and personal belongings, but also setting up an endowment for the foundation to ensure its future. Tom's eyes scanned the words, feeling the weight of Jesse's foresight, his unwavering care even in the face of uncertainty. "There's also a letter," Daniel added softly. Tom unfolded the second sheet. Jesse's handwriting was unmistakable, familiar, full of his characteristic hope and honesty. "Dear Tom, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here to do the work myself, but I trust you. I trust you to keep the light burning. I started with a story, a simple act, $10 and a smile. But this is bigger now. It's not about me or even about you. It's about the hundreds of faces we'll never see, the futures we can change together. Use this wisely, grow it, let it be a promise that no one who walks through that door is ever truly alone. Thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself. Always, Jesse." Tears welled in Tom's eyes, but he blinked them back, focusing instead on the quiet power of those words. For so long, he had doubted his place in this world. But here was proof that kindness, even in small measures, could spark a movement. Daniel watched silently, then cleared his throat. "Caleb also asked me to say that he's found his own path in social work, just as he promised, and that he'll be joining the Foundation's board next month." Tom smiled, a warmth spreading through him that no winter chill could touch. "Tell Caleb I'm proud of him," Tom said, "and that Jesse's work is safe, because we're all carrying it forward now." Daniel nodded, handing over a business card. "If you ever need anything, legal advice, support, or just a friendly face, you know where to find me." With a final handshake, Daniel turned and walked out, leaving Tom alone with Jesse's words and the quiet hum of a future still unfolding. That afternoon, Tom called Eleanor. They spoke long into the evening, planning the next steps: a scholarship fund, outreach programs, and partnerships with local schools. Every idea, every plan, carried the spirit of a boy who had once cried alone at a gas station, and the man who had given him $10, a simple gesture that had blossomed into something far greater than either could have imagined. Later, as the Foundation's lights dimmed and the city settled into night, Tom sat back in his chair, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years. Outside, the rain began again, gentle, steady, like a promise. He thought of Jesse, of Caleb, of all the faces that had come and gone through these doors, and he understood at last a single act of kindness, no matter how small, could echo through time, reshaping lives, healing wounds, and lighting the darkest corners. And that legacy, it belonged not just to Jesse or to Tom, but to everyone brave enough to believe in hope. Because sometimes, the last $10 isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning.